Hello everyone, welcome to GS Core. My name is Abhishek Saxena, and in today's session we are going to talk about the mains concept mapping approach to mains, that is through question to concepts. Well, the idea behind these sessions is to orient you to score more marks in the mains examination. If we look at the examination as such, every question that is asked in the examination is a test of a concept, right? And it is vital for a candidate for civil services examination to look into how questions are actually a manifestation of the concepts. And through this exercise of question to concept, we are trying to map that journey for you, so that with this approach you can actually value add your learning, enrich it, and hence fetch more marks in the examination. So today we are going to talk about the subject of governance and social justice, that is GS paper 2. If we look at the weightage of governance and social justice, it is approximately 90 to 100 marks. That is approximately 40% of the entire paper, right? And hence it is a vital element in our overall preparation and scoring too. As part of today's session, we are going to take up a very interesting, a very important topic from the syllabus, that is devolution of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein. This is a line, a phrase exactly picked up from the syllabus so that you can map the concept from the question. So let us begin. So this is a previous year question. To what extent, in your opinion, has the decentralization of power in India changed the governance landscape at the grassroots? This question was asked in the year 2022 and carried 10 marks. So as we see the question and have a glance at it, we can very well deduce that the word limit is somewhere around 150 words, right? But if we look at the language of the question, right, decentralization of power in India, and it is seeking your opinion. So it is clearly not referring to something which is very, very bookish, right, or ideal. It is asking something which is very, very practical or real, right? So decentralization of power in India changed the governance landscape. That means what changed, and the tonality of the question tells you that it is talking about the examination of the positive change, howsoever little or more, which has been brought about, right, at the grassroots. So whenever we talk about decentralization of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein, right, it is mapping to that concept because it is asking you to apprise the performance of the local government. Mind you, it is not explicitly distinguishing between urban or rural. It is simply saying at the grassroots. And hence, to decipher the question, to map the concept, that is decentralization of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein, is the most vital part to actually begin to write the answer. Because if we get wrong here, right, we will be completely on a deviant trajectory and we'll be writing an answer which is not relevant to the question. And hence it is vital that whenever we see the question, we read it, we trace it back to a concept from the syllabus and then zero it down to the peculiarities within that concept to actually construct our answer. So while the question itself is talking about the idea of decentralization of power in India, that means India being a democratic country, we are talking about democratic decentralization, right? And the quality of the governance at the grassroots. Okay, so let us examine the underlying concept as part of this question. The syllabus gives us devolution of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein. So clearly we are talking about certain things. We are talking about democratic decentralization as a concept and also the local governments within which both urban local bodies and panchayati raj institutions, right? While the structural part, that is the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, Balwant Mehta Committee, Singhvi Committee, this committee, that committee, will form the part of the Indian polity. The functional part, that is the performance, the appraisal, how these things actually operate on ground, how these entities and institutions actually function on ground, is something which is the preserve of governance and social justice. A lot of you might think that why am I including social justice with it? Well, if we look at the examination, either the questions are generic of this sort in terms of the abstraction that the question actually offers, capturing a wider, bigger canvas. There have been instances where the questions have linked and interlinked multiple aspects, which is at the very DNA of the subject of governance and social justice. So you can be asked to comment upon the decentralization of power and, let us say, healthcare system, gender dynamics, education, infrastructure and whatnot. So the idea is that it has to cover a broader spectrum. Okay. So whenever we look at these functional elements, we need to look for 4 F's, that is funds, functions, functionaries and functionality. And if you look at the interrelation, all of them are interlinked with each other, because without funds you cannot carry out functioning, right? Without funds you cannot carry out functions and you cannot pay the functionaries. So all of them reinforce each other, and the weakness in one aspect impinges upon the others. For example, if you have too many functions but no funds, can you perform them? Right? Similarly, if you have funds, functions, but your functionaries are ill-equipped, they are not trained, structurally, administratively, there are issues, then can you discharge those functions and realize the fruits of governance, good governance on ground? No. So ultimately your governance suffers, right? So that is the central idea. If we look at the scheme of the things, you have a central government, state government and local government. And local governments are largely related to the state government for the devolution of those powers and functions, because every state, according to its own needs, suitability and conditions, come up with local governments as mandated by 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. While there are certain mandatory provisions, there are optional provisions as well. And based on the discretion of the state, the functions are allocated. Hence, at times, there is a mismatch in terms of the capabilities, the structure of these local governments and the functions with which they are endowed. At the same time, even if functions are given, adequate sources of revenue and the working capital of sorts is not ensured. Also, there are issues related to functionaries, the entire personnel management system, whether separated, unified or integrated. So we largely find these three personnel management system at the ground level, that is at the local level. Okay. At the same time, the functionality, the interagency coordination, the role of parastatal agencies, the role of district collector, district rural development authorities, right? So all those things make the entire equation very, very complex. Okay. So these are the underlying concepts, right? Apart from that, the contemporary developments, for example, if I talk about PM Swamitwa, right, it is through PRIs that this scheme is realized. MG Narega. So it is these very agencies at the ground, the local level governments, which actually realize these schemes on ground. So the effective implementation of various policies, programs also rest on the shoulders of the local government. And within this, over this entire gamut of concepts, you have the broader principle of democratic decentralization. Basically, the idea of democratic decentralization was to bring governments closer to the people, where the democracy did not used to end at the ballot box. That kind of a vision was with the democratic decentralization, taking governance closer to the grassroots, closer to the people. It would, ideally envisage that it would make quick decision making, right? At the same time, it would cut the red tape that comes with the hierarchy and the value chain of the decision making system. Also, it would provide better representations to the people, since these are responsible form of governments popularly elected by the people. Hence, the agenda that they will set will have a far more legitimacy. Also, these agencies will lead to deepening of democracy, more real meaning of democracy, more direct democracy, right? However, in the appraisal of these entire gamut of things, we'll have to say that what we have hit in terms of the achievements and what we have missed, and that is all the crux of the idea of devolution of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein. Let us try and answer the question in terms of the way to go about it. So like I said before, the question points out towards the decentralization of power and the change in the grassroots. Okay. So the central idea of the question is about decentralization of power and change in grassroots level. So this dynamics have to be, analyzed as part of this question. And like I said, we need to give an account of the hits and misses. So to open up, we'll have to talk about the idea of decentralization of power, right? Ultimately, the government is an entity which has been created to serve the public interest. However, over the course of time, with the increasing complexity of government's functions, we have seen an alienation, a distance of people and government, which not only diluted the legitimacy of the state, but also negatively impacted the efficacy of state in terms of realizing the public interest and delivering public goods. To remedy this anomaly, the idea of democratic decentralization has come as a boon, wherein the state actually devolves functions which can be performed at the grassroots level, closer to the people, in the form of responsible governments. This is also in consonance with the idea of principle of subsidiarity as suggested by second ARC. Right? However, if we see the success or the performance of these local level governments, we see a mixed bag. While yes, it has led to a considerable improvement in terms of governance at the grassroots, but still a long distance needs to be covered. Then we will talk about the issues of fund, functions, functionaries and functionalities and the hits and misses in them. It would be better if we can give certain examples. For example, it has led to empowerment of women. So the social change it has brought about. It has ingrained the democracy at the grassroots in terms of better information, better sensitization to people about their rights. Also, these institutions are sort of entangled in the web of the ills of these 4 F's, in the sense that they do not have adequate funds. Often they do not raise taxes or are not self-sufficient because of the populist reasons. The workforce is not trained, equipped, they lack capacity building. Often there is a conflict in jurisdiction with the parastatal authorities. Often the state governments, the governments at the provincial level, do not pay heed to the voice and the needs of these local governments, right? Also, they are heavily politicized. Often we have seen examples of infrequent elections, of state governments dismissing the local governments at whims, right? So we'll talk about all those things, and then we'll actually shape up the narrative after we have given the reasons that how this has changed the grassroots. So we'll encapsulate that yes, it has brought significant changes, especially in terms of functions which are carried out at the ground, vis-a-vis primary healthcare interventions, the entire vaccination program with initiatives like Manrega, PM Swamitva, etc. But still a long road needs to be traveled. Also, while the dream of democratic decentralization is all about a bottom-up governance, a decentralized form of governance, also empowerment of the people and deepening of democracy, heavy politicization and the use of money, muscle power, as well as the domination of primordial identities like caste, religion, etc. still plagues the system, and it will take some time and more persistent efforts from the state to actually de-weed the system of these ills. So this is actually how we will have to shape up our answer. So if you realize from the concept map that I gave you, to which it pins, we will have to selectively pick up elements as per the need of our question, frame it in the language and the manner in which our question is posing the problem to us, right? Since the question was very, very wide in its approach, we cannot afford to go into very vivid details because it was a 150 word kind of an answer, a 10 marker. However, there might be other questions, certainly, with larger marks allocation, also with a far more surgical focus, wherein you can and you should go into greater details, right? So this is how we can construct an answer. Now let us explore this area and extrapolate this dimension to some probable questions, which will help us to actually analyze this space better. So the first question here: do you support the idea that minimum basic educational criteria should be fixed for election to village local bodies? Justify your views. Well, there are certainly some local bodies in the country, especially in a state like Rajasthan, wherein there is a minimum educational criteria. So it is clearly referring to the functionaries angle, right? Functionaries angle, whether that should be included or not. Obviously, there are views for and against it. The for would be that setting up minimum educational criteria would actually eliminate illiterate people, which might not work that well. But the point is, there is an element of exclusion. It will exclude a majority of the people. So whom will the representatives represent if they are not representative of the crowd or the electorate that they represent? Because at the grassroots we see that the sample size gets far more constrained, and especially in village areas you won't have many literate people, so it will make the body elitist. So those are the pitfalls. So you will have to balance it out in terms of how do you support the idea or you reject the idea. Obviously you can take any of the line, but the correct approach would be to take a balanced view that yes, this is okay, but they should vary. It cannot be a blanket sort of a criteria based on the population and education profile, and can be periodically reviewed after every 10 or 15 years, wherein the profile actually elevates and people get educated, right? So that sort of a thing can be done here. So like I said, it has linked the element of functionaries and functioning to education, and this was something which was in news, right? So contemporary orientation manifesting itself as a question alluding to a central concept from our syllabus. Next, true democratic decentralization remains a distant dream for PRI's comment. So this is all critical, that while democratic decentralization as envisaged by the constitution is being implemented, but it is only being implemented in a compliance oriented manner and not in letter and spirit, then you will have to highlight all the ills plaguing the democratic decentralization. Like I said, the primordial identities, the panchayat patis, wherein even if 1/3 of the seats have been reserved for women and they are rotated every election cycle, the man of the house, whether it is the husband or the father, etc., rule the roosts. I hope you have seen the web series Panchayat, right? So this is a reality on the ground. Also, while the democratic decentralization is there, do these agencies have the powers? Even if they have the powers, do they have freedom of action in terms of functionalities? So we will have to encounter on all the 4 F's that we have discussed to actually justify that how on paper it is very much there, but in the spirit with which it was brought about, still a lot of distance needs to be traveled. And this is especially for PRIs, not generally where we can include urban local bodies as well, right? Next, the project of local self-government in India is neither local nor self. Critically analyze. Again, critical appraisal. When it says neither local, that means it is devoid of local flavor. It is largely the party politics. Also, the state governments exercising their whims, the ultimate control remaining at the hands of the state governments, also in the hands of the office of district collector and not with the public representatives. So we'll have to justify it as neither local nor self, right? So again, on a critical note, we'll have to talk about 4 F's, but I hope you can understand the difference between the two. Here it is talking about general pitfalls, right? So it will have a wider coverage of spectrum. Here it is talking about the local nature and the self nature, the true decentralization. So the answers, though on the similar lines, will have to be constructed in a manner that they justify the surgical focus here and the broad focus here. Okay, and similar is the case of the examples that needs to be given, right? So I hope that through this approach of question to concept, you will be able to better your preparation when you read, revise these subjects. You'll be able to learn to think critically, to think out of the box, and to think to write answers that fetch marks and not simply copy notes in the examination, right? So that's all. Thank you.